The Maternal Thread by C.J. Van Pletsen. The horse theft. The desert at night could feel like a grave. Silence lay so thick over the village near Tamanrasset that even the goats seemed to hold their breath. The sand clung to the mud brick walls, wind pressing low, as if the Sahara itself was waiting to see what men would do beneath its stars. It was supposed to be clean. 3 men, 1 night, 2 Arabian stallions, no blood, no echoes. That was the order handed to Sergeant Jean Renaud, Zuriel Schmidt's false name, still polished in Legion files. He wore it like armor and like chains. To the officers, the mission was justice against a Berber chieftain accused of skimming supplies. To Zuriel, it was shadow work, another theft dressed as honor. He crouched in the alley's narrow throat, the night air tasting of copper and dust. Corporal Lefebvre crouched beside him, silent, steady. Behind them, Barrett, the newcomer, breathed too loud, boots shifting on stone despite a dozen whispered warnings. Fear always fired first. Zuriel had learned that truth in a dozen tongues. 2 guards slouched outside the stable, their heads bobbed. Too easy, too staged. Zuriel raised his hand, palm flat. Halt. Barrett didn't see caution. He saw opportunity. 1 shot cracked the darkness, bright and brittle as shattering glass. The first guard folded. The second screamed. The village woke like a struck hive doors flung wide, thin wails, the thud of running feet. Somewhere a woman cried for her children. Dogs barked once and then were strangled by their own terror as the first flames rose. Zuriel whipped around. Barrett, wild-eyed, mouth peeled back into an eager grin, rammed a torch into a sheaf of straw. Fire gulped the stable rafters in one greedy breath. Horses shrieked, eyes rolling white, hooves drumming earth in a panic that rattled the ribs. The air turned thick with the stink of burning hair. This was no theft. This was slaughter, the girl in the dust. He shoved past Barrett, shouldering into the smoke as if he were stepping into judgment itself. The air struck him like an open hand, hot and alive, a violence that clung. Heat slapped against his face, wrapped his body in its grip, and crawled beneath his eyelids until the skin of his eyes seemed to blister. It forced itself down his throat and into his lungs, every breath a draft of iron and ash. He gagged, tasting rust and burnt marrow, as if the fire had melted the bones of the earth and poured them into his mouth. The world narrowed corridor upon corridor of flame walls that breathed and shifted, tongues of fire writhing like serpents anointed in oil. The Legion was gone. The desert behind him erased, even the weight of his borrowed name, Jean Renaud, stripped from him in the smoke. There was only the passage ahead, a furnace that did not end, and his steps within it, heavy as guilt. And then he saw her, a girl, no more than 6. She was not framed in grandeur, not radiant with light. She was small, slight, half in shadow, half in the quivering torch glow of the fire that devoured her home. She lay crumpled as if sleep itself had been beaten into her by unseen hands, her body bent against the hard earth in the posture of surrender. Her tunic, once white or pale, was soaked dark at the center, a stain that spread outward like a star collapsing into night. 1 hand so small, so impossibly small, reached into the air, trembling. Fingers curled and uncurled, groping for something invisible, as if she searched blind for a promise she had been told would come. Zuriel stopped. He stopped as though a hand greater than flame had seized his chest. The desert was gone. The barracks, the Legion, the false name stitched across his breast pocket burned away, leaving him naked before this sight. The noise of the world dimmed to a single thread of breath. The heat became a background, a secondary pain. The dust underfoot, the roar of the horses, the shouts of men, they were nothing. The world shrank to the size of that hand. Her eyes flickered open, lashes sticky with soot. She blinked once. The effort itself seemed to tear her. She was trying with all that was left in her to focus, and she fixed on him. Zuriel, a stranger, a soldier, a man with no name worth giving. Her breath trembled, shallow, 2 stitches of air holding together a body that already leaned into death. Then came the sound. It tore the night in two. A mother's scream. Not the scream of terror, nor even of grief already formed, but the raw eruption of something older than language. It was the cry of Eve in the garden when she first knew her sons would kill each other. It was Rachel at Ramah, weeping for her children because they were not. It was the scream of every mother since dust learned to walk upright. Raw, animal, eternal. Zuriel bent. His knees touched ash. He gathered the child, lifting her as though she were made of paper or smoke. She was light, too light, and yet heavy with the weight of all he could not undo. He placed her in her mother's arms, careful, reverent, as if giving back a relic stolen from an altar. Ash clung to his hands, black and fine, clinging as flower touched by thunder, refusing to let go. His palms shook, though he did not notice until later. He forced Arabic out of a throat that had turned to iron. His voice cracked, almost broke. "Forgive me." The woman's eyes, bright as the fire around them, fixed on him. Her grief sharpened into fury. She spat into his face, the saliva mixing with smoke, running down his cheek hot as acid. She did not curse him in words, but her gaze was curse enough. Fury brighter than the flames, grief older than the dust. He did not wipe it away. He did not lift a hand to defend himself. He let the spit and smoke and guilt mark him together, one trinity upon his skin. "Sergeant!" Lefebvre's voice, ragged with command, ripped through the roar of the fire. "We have to go! Now!" Zuriel didn't move. He turned instead toward Barrett. The torch in Barrett's fist guttered in the smoke, its light jumping, making his grin appear and vanish like the face of a demon half-formed. His laughter had filled the night only moments ago, laughter that carried the scent of cruelty. Now it faltered. Zuriel stepped close, hands swift, and tore the rifle from Barrett's grip. Before Barrett could react, Zuriel swung. The stock met bone. A hollow crack rang out, as though the ground itself had opened to welcome him. Barrett dropped, as if falling into the grave that had always waited for him. The fire answered with a roar. Flames leapt higher, devouring the rafters, tongues climbing into the night sky. Horses screamed, eyes rolling white, and tore free from their tethers. They bolted into the darkness, manes catching sparks, each gallop a fleeting crown of ember and light before the dark swallowed them whole. The night wind, restless and cruel, bent low and fed the blaze a feast of breath. The fire thickened, gorged, laughed in its own devouring. Zuriel turned once more. Through smoke that wove like veils across his sight, he glimpsed the girl again. A blink, a smear of motion, her small frame wrapped in her mother's shawl, pressed to her breast, as if flesh could become fortress. And in that instant, the barest instant, he saw it. A tremor in the girl's fingers, not heat shimmer, not the seduction of smoke, not the trickery of a soldier's guilty mind. A twitch, a will, the smallest defiance against the decree of death. It came to him like the memory of a pulse felt at a wrist you are sure has gone still. A faint echo of life, of insistence. It could have been nothing, a lie the night told to pity a killer. a dream already collapsing. But it branded him all the same. It seared itself into the marrow of his bones, marked him with fire deeper than the flames around him. That twitch became covenant. That breath, half broken, became law. He would carry it, whether she lived or died, whether she was an ember or a ghost. The girl in the dust. And Zuriel knew some wounds were not given to be healed. They were given to be born. Breaking with the legion, they staggered out of the stable, coughing fire from their lungs. The night itself seemed split, torn open by smoke and the shriek of burning rafters. Lefebvre's hand found Zuriel's arm and clamped down like a man clutching the last rope of the world. He yanked, half dragging him down the alley's narrow throat. Behind them, the blaze swelled, an organ of flame playing a hymn that had no god in it. Their shadows long, grotesque spread like monsters upon the wall, jerking with each leap of fire, as though the smoke itself conspired to accuse them. "Sergeant," Lefebvre panted, his voice rasping as if every syllable scraped the lining of his chest. "You'll hang if we stay." Zuriel stopped, or rather the world stopped inside him. A stillness descended on him with the weight of a verdict, the heat and the screaming, the gaping red behind him. Lefebvre's panic, everything folded in upon itself. "Then we won't," Zuriel said. His own voice startled him, too calm for a burning world. It carried no tremor, no plea. It was not defiance nor submission. It was the cold clarity of a man whose soul had already been placed on the scales. By dawn, when the sky at last admitted to being sky and not smoke, Zuriel stood in the command tent alone. The canvas sagged like tired flesh, the lanterns half spent. The air was bitter with last night's fire, with sweat, with the metallic undertone of dried blood. His uniform was a smear of ash. His hands could not stop trembling. The smell of burning seemed sewn into his skin, into his hair, into the marrow of his bones. He would never wash it out. He removed the insignia from his breast pocket. Metal once proud, now ridiculous, caught the weak morning light. He set it on Lieutenant Gerard's desk. The click was soft, yet it carried more finality than a rifle shot. A single small sound in a room that had become a tomb. Gerard leaned back in his chair, lips twisting. He was a man who savored cruelty the way others savored fruit. He rolled the words before releasing them, as if tasting their ripeness. "You'll hang for this." Zuriel met his gaze. His eyes no longer held the Legion's discipline, nor the fear of consequence. They were eyes emptied of camouflage. "No," he said. His voice was quiet, but unshakable. The tone of one who has already stood before judgment and been found wanting. "I won't." He turned and walked out, into a sun that had not yet decided if it would rise. By afternoon, the rolls of the Legion were amended. The name Jean Renaud was stricken clean, erased as though it had never borne breath or sweat. A fiction laid in a shallow grave. What remained was neither officer nor deserter, neither Frenchman nor foreigner, only Zuriel Schmidt ghost, traitor, fugitive, haunted wandering. The desert took him as though it had been waiting. No border, no line of departure, no fanfare. The Legion ended, and the desert began. He walked from one into the other, as a man might walk through a veil. The world swallowed him without ripple, without protest. The dunes rolled outward like an ocean made of sleep, their backs rising and sinking, every crest an eyelid half closed. He walked until the muscles in his legs forgot the idea of stopping. The horizon offered no comfort. It only repeated itself, dune after dune, as though the earth were caught in a psalm of endless refrain. Wind erased his passage, every footprint, every stagger, offered up and devoured. No witness remained. It was as though the desert itself conspired to prove he had never existed. But the silence was not empty. Every sound betrayed him, echoing into memory. The hiss of sand against stone became the broken breath of the mother whose scream had cut him open. The groan of heat through cracked mud brick became the timbers of the stable collapsing in fire. He could not move without hearing Barrett's laughter. Then the hollow crack of rifle stock against bone spinning in his skull like a wheel that would not stop turning. The desert, vast and merciless, became his conscience externalized. On the third day, thirst began to tear the threads of his mind. His thoughts staggered sideways, bent, folded. He began to see water where none lived, and people who were only mirages. His tongue cracked. His lips bled salt. The sun pinned him like an insect on glass. It was then, as delirium pressed him, that the wind shifted. A thin ribbon of scent unfurled through the dry air. Goat sour, earthy. Then something more sharp mint bruised under a thumb. The bitter clarity of boiled tea. Human. Alive. He angled toward it, half walking, half falling, body pulled not by will but by memory of survival. His boots dragged across sand that yielded then betrayed, giving way beneath him as though conspiring against his weight. He pressed forward until the dunes split apart to reveal a black tent, low and humble to the ground. Figures rose from the sand as though conjured. Women unveiled by necessity, hands steady, gestures unhurried. They were mercy without theater, the mercy of those who had built their entire theology upon survival. They did not ask who he was. They did not ask what he had done. They gave what was needed. Water touched his lips first. He expected greed to seize him, but no, he sipped carefully, learned from hard lessons. Each swallow was small, reverent, as if the act of drinking had to be earned by humility. Tea followed, bitter, mint cut through with sweetness, the taste of the desert itself tempered by human patience. That night, by the glow of embers, an elder woman studied him. Her eyes read not his face, but his hands, his palms spread open to her scrutiny. Lines like riverbeds, calluses thick, ash still clinging in the creases. She traced them with her gaze as though they were scripture. "You carry two shadows," she said at last, voice low, certain. "One that looks behind you, one that looks forward." Zuriel's throat tightened. He wanted to laugh, but it came out bitter. "I carry a grave," he said. The woman shook her head, eyes ancient as the dunes. "Graves are endings. Your shadow is not finished." Her words lodged in him like a seed, one he could not yet understand, one the desert itself seemed to guard until its time. Return to the ashes. Days later, when the wind no longer burned his lips, and his thirst had become a dull ache instead of a torment, Zuriel turned back. The desert tried to dissuade him, it always did, whispering with its endless dunes, erasing the path as quickly as it was made. But guilt has its own compass. It needs no stars, no sky. It pulls at the marrow, drags the body where reason would never choose to go. So he walked, retracing steps that had already been buried by the earth's indifference. He followed not with his eyes, but with the memory of fire, the smell of smoke still soldered into his skin, the echo of a mother's scream still nailed into his skull. Each mile backward was a confession whispered to the dust. At last he reached the village. What had once been walls was now rubble. What had once been a stable was a black wound on the ground. The beams had caved inward, forming a crucible of ash and silence. It was not ruin alone, it was aftermath, the kind of silence that hovers after judgment has fallen. Zuriel crouched near the wreckage. Ash stirred around his knees, fine as flour, lifting on the faintest breeze as though reluctant to leave. His hands scarred, blackened dug into the debris. And there, half buried, he saw it. A glimmer. He brushed aside the soot and lifted a thread. A bracelet. Blue glass beads strung on gut, no richer than a child's toy, yet heavy with the weight of touch. A little bronze charm dangled at its center, worn smooth by countless rubs of a thumb, an object, both fragile and enduring. Memory hardened into metal. It was warm in his palm, but only because his own hand was warm. Zuriel's breath caught. For a moment, the world went still, save for the sharp pulse in his temple. The bracelet was too intimate to be random, too whole to have belonged to no one. He closed his fist around it and felt it press into his skin, leaving a mark like a burn. Beyond the ruin, the ground whispered more. He noticed faint drag marks leading outward, cutting a line from the stable into the narrow throat of an alley. And beside them, prints, small footprints, delicate, precise, a woman's stride, and another smaller still, too small to be a woman's. His throat closed, his mind rebelled. For the first time, a flicker moved through him. Hope. But hope was cruelty, sharper than despair, because despair had at least the mercy of certainty. Hope tore wounds open again, kept them from healing, forced them to bleed endlessly. Hope said, "She may have lived." And with that whisper came a second. "Then you may yet be judged by her eyes." Zuriel hated it, hated himself for feeling it. But he could not deny the bracelet pressed against his ribs. Subtle survival. He left the ruins with the bracelet hidden beneath his coat, pressed tight against his ribs, as though its fragile thread might keep his heart from breaking apart. He told no one. Not Lefebvre. Not the desert women who had given him water. Not even the silence, though silence seemed the only companion willing to listen. But silence is not empty. It is alive. And in its breathless chambers, images returned to him. The twitch of a small hand against smoke, the faint quiver of fingers refusing to yield to death. The scream of a mother torn from her center, but now, within that scream, something else threaded itself. Not only grief, not only fury, a note of survival, sharp and bright, buried but not extinguished. At night, when the fire was low and the stars glared down like unblinking judges, Zuriel lay still and felt the bracelet's shape under his ribs. He traced it with absent fingers, as though each bead were a prayer. The desert gave no answers, only silence. Yet even silence can hint. Hints that one life, meant to be erased, had walked away from the fire. Hints that survival is not always mercy, but sometimes the sharpest blade of all. Closing, Zuriel did what soldiers rarely do. He carved remembrance. Not names, not victories, but wounds. With his knife, by the light of embers, he etched the shape of the girl's hand into the handle's bone. Not delicate, not adorned. Crude, trembling, but unmistakable. A child's hand, small and outstretched. He told himself it was penance, to carry her wherever he went, to never let the fire pass into forgetting. Each time his palm closed on the hilt, he would remember. He would bleed inside again and again, but deep down, in the place he could not name, he feared it was more than penance. He feared it was prophecy. He moved on, carrying the knife, the bracelet, the silence, through villages where the air smelled of grain and sweat, through forts where the walls leaned with age and soldiers drank to kill time, toward the coast, where the sea waited with its salt mouth open, ready to bear him further south. But no matter how far his feet carried him, the bracelet pressed against his ribs. The etched hand burned against his palm, and the twitch of a child's fingers, whether memory, vision, or lie, followed him like a shadow that would never release its claim. A shadow that whispered not of endings, but of something yet to come.